cliffcentral.com on a Thursday morning. It's time for the Burning Platform. This is where we get into all of the issues around politics, the economy, society, all the things that we think mostly we should be paying attention to, the stuff that affects all of us. And we're going to be joined in a minute by our guests. But as usual, my co-host for this and every Burning Platform is Phumi Mashiko. And Pumi's got some stuff on her agenda that she wants to address as well. So we'll get to that in a second. First of all, Rorisang Tshabalala is no stranger to cliffcentral.com. In fact, he used to host his own show here for a very long time. He is also someone who, that show, by the way, is called Frankly Speaking. And Rory, how are you? First of all, haven't seen you in a long time.
Hey, guys, I'm very well. How are you?
Good, nice to see you.
Good to see all of you. Pumi, great to see you. Gareth.
Rorisang, you look amazing, Mr. Tshabalala.
I really appreciate that, Pumi. Coming from you, I know it's true. So thank you very much. And Gareth, good to see that you've survived the most recent lynching.
Well, it happens to us, Rory. So it's all poppy stuff. But as we discussed last week on the show, it's something I suppose you have to be prepared for in this country. First of all, if you say anything in a week leading up to an election that can be pounced upon, then it's going to be. But I own all those things about my own personality, which either drive people crazy or make them love me. So I've just got to accept it. And I do think it would be fun to have Muzuli back on the show at some point, and I have invited her back. So let's see if she takes up the offer. It'd be good to have her here to again explain herself, which I think she did a pretty good job of last time. And perhaps this time we can actually speak to her about some more things that have less to do with the elections and more to do with her. Anyway, Rory, it's good to have you. The other guest this morning is none other than Sara Gon. She is the head of strategic engagement at the Institute of Race Relations. Hi, Sara. How are you?
Hi, Gareth. Well, thanks. Hi, Pumi. Hi, Rory.
Hello. Good to see you. Sara also writes and co-edits The Daily Friend, which is the IRR's opinion portal, and she also heads up Educate, Don't Indoctrinate, which is a website aimed at parents and teachers who are concerned with their kids being taught things that the parents don't necessarily know about in schools. So we'll find out all about these and other issues. So guys, first up, I mean, it's like the thing you can't avoid talking about. It's only a couple of weeks down the line, but coalitions, the clock is ticking and they're going to run out of time. I think the deadline is for Thursday, either today or next week. I can't remember which one it is, but they have to come to some sort of arrangement because these municipalities aren't going to function otherwise. So any comments off from the start? Pums, do you want to throw anything in based on what you've been reading in the news?
Gareth, don't be rude. You messed up with our guests. Guys, do you see what you're doing there? You're like trying to civilize.
All right.
Let's
all right, so let's go. Sara, you get first shot at this. Coalition governments. Are you hopeful at all? I've seen some things you've been putting in the Daily Friend about what you believe might happen there. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's baby step stuff. You actually, to run coalitions effectively, you need a fair amount of maturity amongst all your political parties. And I think one of the problems is that maturity at the moment is lacking. I think every party virtually has at least a slightly different agenda in parts, and some are in it for the power, and that's part of the problem. And it looks like the EFF has kind of negotiated itself out of coalition with anybody. I think making in a very fraught, very locally based issue, the EFF's larger demands they just alienate, and I'm not sure if there's anyone who'll go into coalition with them anymore. There seem to be coalitions that are being put together, but they do involve very new parties, so they'll have to see the test of time.
Can I just throw this in here, because the EFF are not alone. I mean, the ANC and Herman Mashaba both come out. Not the ANC, the DA and Herman Mashaba both said that they refuse to have any coalitions with the ANC as well. Wouldn't it have been a good idea for these parties to have not said all of this before elections and rather cobbled something together afterwards that kind of painted themselves into corners? And I see the only alliance which has been publicized in the last while is the patriotic alliance of Gayton McKenzie and the ANC, where really there's just been an offer of positions for Gayton's people in Karoo municipalities no one cares about except the people who live there.
I think the IFP and the ANC have now cobbled together a significant relationship. They don't call it a coalition. I'm not quite sure what it comprises, but essentially they are going into coalition. I think the problem is, given how fraught relations are in the country politically, and the fact that the ANC has done such an appalling job. I mean, load shedding is just the constant reminder of how bad things are. I think they've taken, and these parties have taken the decision that to be seen to go into coalition with the ANC would betray the voters who voted for them, and they can go into coalition with pretty much anyone else except the ANC, and I think that's what they base it on. Whether that's right or wrong will be more difficult to determine, particularly as it's likely to lead to the need for re-elections where the municipalities are hung and can't function.
So, Rory, what do you have to say about all these coalitions? Are you hopeful?
From a citizen's standpoint, Gareth, I'm not hopeful. At the heart of it is whether our lives as citizens will be improved, and I just think it's going to be very difficult. So if you look at the municipal landscape and what needs to happen to fundamentally change municipal administration, you've got broke municipalities all over the place. They don't have money. A lot of the money that they do manage to collect, those that are able to collect, is going to paying salaries. So there's very little left for capital expenditure and for service delivery. Now you build a coalition of people that are ideologically opposed to one another. So the one will say, what we need to do is we need to cut services in certain areas so that we can, save costs. Others will say, well, let's get rid of a few people. This bloated public service thing needs to go. But now you've got two people who are in a coalition that have very different views on that. And so I think my concern is that the types of coalitions between parties that are ideologically opposite is going to be a problem, and we might actually just see more gridlock rather than see that, we need massive shifts in municipalities, and those massive shifts aren't going to happen if you're in this gridlock. I mean, what's happening in the ANC now, and this and these two different centers of power that are fighting it out is clear sign, and how slow Cyril has been able to move is a clear indicator of what happens when two ideologies clash and try to make things work. So I think my greatest concern is that it doesn't matter who it's with, it's not going to make a difference. And I think just a quick response to, the thing of, well, we can't go in with the ANC because we see things very differently. Let's not forget that the DA got into coalition with the EFF, and you would think that those are those. So it's really not about, in the final analysis, it tends not to be about ideologies and so on, and whether we think we'll betray our voters or not. It really is about power and the machinations of politics. So I don't think it's going to change anything, really. These are politicians being politicians.
Well, Pumi, I mean, you and I have been very...
the best thing is happening. The best thing is actually happening for all of us right now.
What's
I think for the country, we talk. I'm going to use the analogy of addicts. Addicts, when they are in the throes of active addiction, what everybody looks for is that they hit rock bottom, because it's only when they've hit rock bottom that they are able to seek help. And I think this municipal election is going to do that. What we're seeing over the past couple of days is we're seeing all the various political parties and their standpoint when it comes to positions of power. When they have the power, are they astute politicians, and do they put the voter and service delivery ahead of everything else? And, Sara says we've seen a lot of lack of maturity. Totally. So one of the things that we have seen is we've seen the politicians kind of crumble in the moment. So what's happened with the EFF, they've just become like a 2-year-old. dug their heels in and they're pouting and stomping about and they're saying, this is what we want within 12 months. If you're not willing to give us this, we want this and we want that. And I think what the voter gets to see is the voter gets to see how the politicians respond to the power and if they really can make a change if given that opportunity. And they're unfortunately lacking in a lot of ways. And what that means is it means that we're going to see South Africa for another 3 years at least. It's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. It's going to keep getting worse. But that's what's going to give the voters an impetus to make the right decision at the next poll that says we've got to get rid of these guys.
I mean, how many polls?
I'm talking about the next national election.
Okay.
This behavior that we are seeing today is going to translate at the next national election. We look at the national election and we look at the local elections as two halves. This one is actually saying that election, there's going to be, I've said this before, that there's going to be seismic shifts. And what we're seeing now, the behavior of the politicians is what's going to determine what that seismic shift really looks like.
But there were people saying that this would be the election of seismic shifts, and we haven't seen.
But it is.
I don't know, Pums. I don't know if we have. I mean, apart from a really good showing by Herman Mashaba and Action SA, and a slight decline in the ANC and a slight decline in the DA, and the emergence of one or two small changes here and there, and all of these hung municipalities. I don't think that all of that is as significant as everybody made it out to be. It's not a huge change. It's not the most massive seismic shift. Or am I wrong, guys? I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you have to then think what has shifted. What the fundamental difference with this election is that people didn't show up. So it's not that people shifted allegiances. It's that they decided not to show up. And so in that regard, then you have to say, is that a seismic shift or not? Or is it simply people sitting it out and then coming back? I think it's quite interesting that people really just said, you know what, we don't like what's on the menu, we'd rather not vote. And what the seismic shift might be in the next election might be some enterprising individual saying, well, let's try and see if we can get closer to the palate of the voter. And that might cause a seismic shift. But outside of that, seismic shifts happen when voter perceptions change. And I'm not 100% convinced that voter perceptions change. They simply say, we don't like what we see. And not that we will not vote for it, but we don't in its current form. So we still like the parties there, but in their current form, we're not really keen on them.
So can we change tack? Because I don't know how much more we can say about this until there's clarity on what the coalitions might be. And really, these politicians, if you don't put them to a deadline, they'll never get there. So let's hope that whenever that deadline comes, they've got some answers. So this is something we didn't talk about last week that was hugely controversial on social media. And again, social media is not the real world, but it does give us a dipstick into how people are feeling. I think that there's been a tremendous amount of emotional outpouring about people who are still really, really hurt, traumatized, upset by, affected by the existence of people like FW de Klerk. And then there are people who've been quite sort of sober and reflective about him. And then there have been people who've, are genuinely sad he's gone, even though we knew this was coming. So it always amazes me when people die that some people become, they start to get it into their heads that this person must have either been a saint or a sinner, and that's all they are. It's binary. And then the other people, it always makes me laugh that so many people are disinterested in history until someone dies, and then they make up their own history. They don't necessarily actually go and check it out. What are your feelings, each of you, on and not just your feelings, but your thoughts on everyone else's feelings in the wake of the death of a former president of the country, and the president who was there before Mandela, and who's also a Nobel Peace Laureate, and who's controversial to say the least. And in his apology, his final message, apologized for apartheid. Is this an indication of some sort of movement? I saw a great article by Mac Maharaj, of all people, that I thought was quite interesting yesterday. And other than that, I haven't seen any real thoughtful analysis on this. So I'm hoping that the three of you will be able to help me figure my way through this.
Can I
You go
perhaps
first.
Go, Sarah.
You know, you make the very good point about people not knowing or understanding their history, and I think this is a very big problem. It's not just a South African problem. I think it's manifested itself in places like America and the UK, and history is important because certain things that happen at a given time have a very different effect to how they would appear at a later stage. So yes, FW de Klerk was very much on the right wing of the Nationalist Party. He came in as president, but he really acted pretty quickly in unbanning the ANC and releasing Nelson Mandela, which suggests that once he knew that he was going to be in the position, he already knew what he'd planned to do. He took advantage of the environment that was left by the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I don't think people expected to like and sort of adore him by any means, but in the context of the time, it wasn't. You can't just say he caved to pressure. He did cave to pressure. There was a lot of pressure to cave, but to do so and to do it categorically, to lead to a situation in which change was so fundamental. I think it's very often people of that ilk, that very conservative, apparently intransigent ilk, who end up making the monumental changes that change the course of history, that help to change the course of history. And I think in his case, that set of decisions and that movement does outweigh where he came from. It doesn't deny it and it doesn't exclude it, but I think it certainly warrants him being remembered predominantly for that, because it was so fundamental.
All right. So his legacy, Rory.
I do wonder though. So I guess the first thing we're saying is that people don't know their history, and maybe that's the first misconception. Maybe they do know the history and they've kind of weighed it up, and they still feel like, on the balance of things, we still really don't like you. And so I think the first mistake that tends to be made is the supposition that people don't know all the things that happened. And I would dare say that actually a lot of this outpouring of negative sentiment towards him is probably driven a lot by what he did post 94, in terms of not being seen to be repentant, in spite of having. So he might have seen to have done a good thing, and then might have then been seen to have proceeded to undo it in successive comments and so on that he made. So I can understand why then there would be this outpouring, and I don't necessarily think it's all a function of ignorance to history. But what I do agree with is that people are complex, and I think to simply reach that binary conclusion on them, it's not particularly helpful. And frankly, I'm lashing out at dead man now. The bigger question is, what's left for me to do? He did his part and he made his rights and wrongs. What do we pick up from that? And unfortunately, I think that in the manner this conversation has been had on him, we seem to be regressing, even beyond the point that he and Mandela and them would have brought us to. So I think it's not particularly productive to spend too much time. We tend to externalize so that we can shirk ourselves of the responsibility of, okay, but he's gone. What are you going to do about it? And I think that's a question that we need to be reflecting on.
Hey, because we're South Africans and we don't like real talk. We don't like real talk as South Africans. I think one of the things that I watched happen over the past week was how international media was able to be so succinct and be able to look at all the nuances and the complexities of the history of the man, of where we are, where we were, all of those things. And South Africans, we're so emotional. We're so emotional, but also we don't want to accept the reality of where we are and who we are. So the people who do feel aggrieved by the way that post 94, de Klerk chose to comport himself, people who do feel aggrieved by that, and the people who want to, for all intents, just say, actually, no, let's forget all about that. Let's look at only this one particular point in time and measure everything against that one particular point in time. And that is so fascinating for me to watch. And the polarized way that we are as South Africans right now, everything is so flammable. Everything is so flammable. We're so raw as South Africans that any small move is it's a fight. We are coming for a fight.
Do you think it's more a function of us? It's less about the men. It's more about reflecting on ourselves and kind of projecting ourselves into this particular space, such that it's very emotional, right? It's
that is such a good distillation. Yeah, I'm. You know what? I was just thinking that while you were saying it, Rory, and this is sorry. It wasn't Mac Maharaj. It was Jay Naidu who wrote in the Daily Maverick. He said, FW de Klerk has died, and his passage has unleashed a cacophony of pent-up emotions for nearly 3 decades we've swept under the carpet. A festering sore is broken, and its pus oozes painfully into our public debate. But de Klerk is just a proxy, he says, for the state of our democratic project. And I think this is why so many people are upset. Look, people in South Africa are generally unhappy, and they have every right to be. Some of that is our own fault. You get the government you deserve. Some of it is because we haven't dealt with some of our own pain and trauma. Some of it is because we haven't done the full reconciliation and we haven't become the rainbow nation that we were promised. And there's a whole lot of pent-up anger there, which I think Jay Naidu goes on to address in this article. And I really do think it's a good article. But FW de Klerk coming and going has so little to do with our day-to-day lives. I mean, I can't remember the last time I heard him make a statement. I was shocked when I saw the video of his final message because I hadn't realized how old he had become. The only footage I'd seen of him was that footage pre-1994 and maybe a little bit post when he was in the Government of National Unity. But I hadn't thought about FW de Klerk for a long time. However, I'm probably not as unhappy as so many people in this country justifiably are. And they're looking for someone to blame. And when someone like this re-enters the public debate, he becomes a central tent peg around which they can put their own anger and frustration and let it, because you know there's this righteous anger that a lot of people feel, and it's pretty much all they can feel at the moment, because anything else they feel is not going to help them either. But this at least makes them feel better, and I think that's where a lot of South Africans are.
Gareth, can I respond to that? Because I agree that I think the problem is, I mean, if one remembers living through that period, whatever was going to happen or how things were going to pan out, given the enormity of apartheid, the change to democracy, there was hope, justified or unjustified, but there was hope because it was such a profound change, and it was a change to what what always desirable, which was a democratic South Africa. I think part of the anger and the vitriol, and I think the problem is it was the unseemliness of the vitriol rather than the emotions behind it, is the fact that we sit here 27 years later, let down by the dominant party in government. South Africa is in such a mess. It's almost like I'd say that some of the anger is about once the opportunity was there and the reins were taken, it has been squandered, and we should be much better off, and we could have been much better off than we were. And I think that's very much feeding into the event of his death.
I do think maybe just to respond to Sarah's point there, I do think that we should also not put so yes, I think there's a definitely disappointment, and more than just disappointment at where we're at right now, and a lot of that responsibility sits at the feet of the ANC. But I think there's beyond just the ANC. I think in the same way that de Klerk is maybe being a proxy, I think the ANC is also a proxy in many ways for how people are just disappointed as well at how we have collectively failed to live up to the ideals or the promise or the hope of what the Rainbow Nation is supposed to be outside of the institution of the ANC. To what extent have we managed to mend fences? To what extent have we managed to make the necessary shifts in our day-to-day life and in the way that we express ourselves? And I think it's a lash out at, let's call it the democratic project, which part of it is the ANC, but is much broader than that, I think.
I think that's a useful analysis. I'm never shocked by anything I see on social media though anymore. So I was less kind of horrified by any of the stuff than maybe some people were, and certainly I had no emotional feeling whatsoever. I believe they're burying de Klerk this Sunday, and I presume they won't be making too much fuss about it, even though he's a former president. I don't know. Does anybody know any details about that?
Yes, apparently it's a private ceremony. So there's no state involvement. The flags are being lowered to half-mast, and I think there'll be some sort of memorial event, but it will be fairly low-key by all accounts.
Well, I think that's a wise decision. I mean, sort of the quieter the better at this point, and I think that's quite astute and sensible if that's what the family have chosen. Anyway, to move on to the democratic project, and let's just talk about load shedding, because again, Andre de Ruyter was forced to report to Parliament this week and to tell them, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, regrettably," as Pumi's pointed out in the press statement. Regrettably, we got to go load shedding stage 2 again. I woke up to it this morning. I'm sure that all of us have had to deal with it in the last few weeks. Do you think they're making any progress at all, or do you think, like so many people in the ANC were saying, they were insinuating between the lines that there was something almost like political sabotage going on around the time of the elections? Clearly there is sabotage, but it's sabotage that's been exacerbated over a period of some 12 years. It's not just the sabotage of the latest dispensation at Eskom. Any comments?
Yeah, I've just recently been reading quite a bit from the technical point of view, not technicalities not being my strong point, but the state of the power stations is really, really bad. And the problem is that a couple of reliable power stations have now become unreliable. So all of the power stations are too old. Maintenance hasn't been done. So maintenance has to constantly be done, and it increases as time goes by. One thing I was struck by is de Ruyter has been complaining about the fact that they can't get the supply of the equipment they need to refurbish parts of the power stations, because they are bound to a certain service provider who is not doing the necessary. And I think in June or July, they asked Treasury for an exemption to be able to go whoever can provide the stuff, and they haven't had an answer yet. So essentially, it's literally crumbling. It's red tape. I mean, that's quite, and it's a procurement thing. So one can imagine the problems that cause, and there is people behaving negligently and incompetently, and it just depends. The reason they talk about growing unplanned outages is because they literally can't foresee when either an accident will happen or something will simply collapse or leak or need replacement, and so it comes in chunks. And one of the points they made that I thought was interesting is, that he complained about the fact that not all municipalities embark on load shedding when Eskom requires them to. Now, I don't understand the mechanics of it, but the reality is that if they don't all comply and leave parts of the grid on, the risk of a total blackout increases enormously. So let's put it this way, not a job I'd want.
Oh, God, no. Do you have any comments on load shedding, Rorisang?
Well, yeah, I guess, most of it has already been spoken about. The one thing that I'm really concerned about is, I think part of what just makes it worse is I don't have a sense, and maybe it's out there, but I haven't seen one where the guys are just like, guys, these are the 15 things we're dealing with, and this is what's causing because maybe people will then understand that, okay, it's, the guys have said it's going to be 1 year until we resolve this one, and 2 years. It always seems, and that's what gives a sense of feeling disorientated, like, again. If we knew that, they've come up to us and they said, guys, there's 15 things we need to deal with. We're currently on number 4. It's going to take us, we expect it to take 6 months. These are the challenges we're expecting to deal with. then maybe, you know, I think people can take a lot of like the suffering if they have a sense of, you know, why they're suffering and how long they're going to have to suffer for. And I think the problem here is we're just not getting effective communication, and quite often there tends to be contradiction of communication amongst the people who are supposed to be closest to the issue. And I think, you know, it's almost even just this administration, the Ramaphosa administration, I think is an area of particular weakness has just been the way they communicate. And I think if all they did was just that, it would make things a lot better, and not just in terms of our you know, our thoughts and feelings, but certainly, you know, investor sentiment, because all of them drives up uncertainty, raises the cost of cap, all of those things. And I just think if we can just get comms right, it could go a long way.
We have a psychologist who joins us every Monday on the show, and he says that the thing that humans don't like is unpredictability. It creates huge anxiety for us. Now, Eskom, as Rory's saying, if Eskom just said to us, "Hey, look, you're in for 3 shit years. You know, it's going to be really tough. We're going to have every week there will be at least 2 days where you'll be affected by load shedding. This is what we're doing. These are the problems." If we knew that and we could prepare and we could plan and we knew what was going on, rather than having this stuff sprung on us the whole time, maybe we'd be a whole lot more optimistic.
Yeah, I think the ability to prepare, the ability to make a plan, particularly in the business environment, is absolutely crucial. And I'd agree. I think they put out little pieces of information, I think, because they're scared that too much information will have the citizenry up in arms. I think that's both patronizing and wrong.
Yeah. Pums?
They don't like to tell us the truth. But I also don't think South Africans like to hear the truth, because also that makes us angry. No, really. Yeah, I mean, Gareth, I'm sure when you have the conversation with the psychologist friend, he'll tell you that on the one side, we don't like predictability, but also on the other side, we really, really, really don't like uncomfortable truths. We don't want to hear it. And so we have this dichotomy of problems that we're looking at. But one of the things, and, you know, we talk about Ramaphosa's presidency, and something that was a couple of days ago very quietly slipped into the media is because, you know, there's the Chief Justice chair up for discussion. And for the first time ever, you know, we have got 4 candidates that are going to have to be interviewed by the JSE. No, interviewed by the JSE, because Cyril Ramaphosa, that he has not disappointed in his presidency, in his indecision, you know, so he has not taken the decision to say, here's my pick, go for it. You know, he's gone, here are 4 people, you guys, you know, go. And that's what we see almost everywhere, you know. So when you see Pravin Gordhan come out and talk about the terms of this in 8 billion or whatever dollars that's coming for the power exchange, you're like, again,
130 billion from COP26, apparently.
There's you know, it's out there, but there's no kind of clear, decisive leadership that says this is what is coming, this is what it entails, this is how we're changing.
So hang on,
Ramaphosa is not giving us any of that.
Cyril isn't even going to appoint the Chief Justice on his own? I mean, this is a simple presidential.
No, he's not.
When are we going to stop?
A list of 4. He's put out a list of 4.
Calling him a collaborative conciliator and start calling him an indecisive, irresponsible person who just never takes accountability for anything. I mean, this guy, he's such a disappointment. Honestly, I think there's still people who are waving the Cyril flag, but there must be 3 of them left, and none of them are at Luthuli House, that's for sure.
If there's anything he has been consistent is his indecision and lack of action. You know, so he's not going to say anything, he's not going to do anything, he's not going to... You don't think he's indecisive? You don't think he's indecisive?
Well, I'm not a flag carrier by any stretch, but I guess we have to test our views on him on the basis of do they catch rats? So to use that metaphor, has his approach delivered results? Certainly for him, and so far it's managed to deliver results. Now the question is that the most effective way of getting the results? And I think that's a valid question, but I do think that we are obviously impatient and all of that, but I haven't seen his thing
Which are the
backfire on
results
him
you're talking
politically.
about?
No,
So
no.
tell
So
us the
let's.
results
What's
you're speaking
happening?
of.
What's happening in the ANC? He's managed to close the space for the RET factions. Remember, he's dealing with all of those dynamics at the same time. So all I'm saying is that his method has worked for him. Whether it's worked for us is a different question, but it certainly seems to be working for him. And I think that for all of our frustration, I can see how he might be saying, well, so far so good, and I'm going to keep doing it, and it helps me hold together the alliances and whatever that I need. So that's why what I'm struggling to get to is the idea of he is indecisive. I think maybe he's very decisive about his approach, and this is his approach, and we don't like it, and it certainly doesn't do well for us because it's not moving fast enough in the areas we need it to move.
Yeah,
I think so. I mean, Rorisang, I hear what you're saying, but the reality is that as much as he is the president of the ANC, he is also the president of this country. And for those of us who are not in the ANC, we actually don't care. I don't give a shit what happens in the ANC. I do, however, care about the economy and care about power and care about water and care about services and care about safety and all of that, holding people accountable in government. So what he does with his party, that's his party, That's his party. And it is well within his prerogative to do that. So when I say what we see in Cyril Ramaphosa's indecision is we see him consistently let South Africa down. And that's important for South Africans. That's important because it is part of how we must hold him accountable, not just Cyril Ramaphosa, but the party that he cares for so much, right? And it's important for us to be realistic about that.
I don't disagree with you. Go ahead, sir.
No, I was saying I've been writing about him since about 2016. I've always been a skeptic. I've been a skeptic because I know from the union background that sort of a conciliatory negotiating position, which doesn't help a country which needs leadership. And leadership means taking some tough decisions, sometimes contrary to the people around you. But I do think that strong leadership will also change the dynamics that exist in the party. If you keep conciliating, if you keep negotiating, the other side always knows that it can get through this process in an attempt to get something. But the other thing to bear in mind, and I've seen this through a number of speeches, and he gets very impassioned and emboldened. Cyril is a committed socialist. And I think one has to take that seriously in respect of whether the reforms we've all expected or hoped to see that would turn around the economy would actually have happened, and that it's the fighting within party that have prevented him from really taking a stand. I think I have a fairly cynical take, as you can see.
Well, can I just let Rory respond to this quickly? And then I do want to bring up something else. But this Cyril, how long are we going to be debating whether or not he's on our side as a country? I'm just having this conversation with people. Like, is this guy actually on our side or is he not?
Well, and maybe the mistake is to separate the Cyril of the party and the Cyril of the country. There is no Cyril of the country without the Cyril of the party, and I think he needs to balance those two out. And it all starts at the party level, and so there will always be a Cyril of the party. But I think there will always be a politician of the party as long as you've got a country that is. I mean, think about, I guess the local government elections are a prime example, right? The minority voted and have decided who it is that we gets to govern. And similarly, I think it's the same at a national level. It's a minority that get to dictate what happens. And so the most powerful force that's influencing him is this minority. And that's why the rest of us feel aggrieved, because we're not that minority. And so he's serving that minority, and he was elected by that minority, and he's mindful of that. So, I don't disagree with the fact that he could be making more, decisions pro-country, but I do understand that the guy does have to juggle, being the Cyril of the party so that he gets permission to be Cyril of the country to whatever extent possible.
All right. Sara, you've got an interesting article this morning in the Daily Friend about this very strange relationship that South Africa has with Israel, and just how much cognitive dissonance is going on, because the government says one thing on Israel and then it does another. And we can't really figure out who our friends and our enemies are when our government can't even decide on a straightforward foreign policy. When you see Miss South Africa being encouraged to boycott the Miss Universe pageant because it's being held in Israel. And you see such disparate forces as, the EFF and a number of Palestinian support groups here in South Africa. Mandla Mandela, who's an MP for the ANC and whose third wife is Muslim, has become very involved in this too. What are your feelings on this? Can you explain to me and articulate for me what exactly the position is of the South African government, and why this poor Miss South Africa has to be caught in the crosshairs when all she wants to do is win a pageant, for God's sake?
Yeah. Look, the government can only withdraw its support. It doesn't have control of the process. The process is a private one. The government's official diplomatic position is it still has diplomatic relations, or be them fraught, between South Africa and Israel, and it says publicly. It states it is in favor of the two-state solution. The problem is, I don't think the various components of the government actually support or believe that. They're much more aligned with the sort of distinctly anti-Israel component, and that component, and it's whether it's the PA or Hamas or Hezbollah or the other groups that are based in the West Bank and Gaza and the Gaza Strip. They've made absolutely no bones about it, and BDS is similar. The ultimate goal is a single state, and a single state means there cannot be a Jewish state. So that's the ultimate goal. And what one underestimates about the Middle East generally is, unlike the West, the Middle East, if you need to, you play the long game. But if you think about the fact that Iran has increased the military assistance to Hamas, you've got Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, you've got the Syrian army on the northeastern border. They are not there to enter into negotiations. Now, whatever Israel is and may have done, and I'm not quibbling with that as a general point, they have not committed genocide. They have not committed atrocities. They do not undertake ethnic cleansing. But those very loaded terms are used by the supporters, by the ANC, because that's part of the way in which that part works. And some things are said so hyperbolically, as one of my colleagues said, it's almost as if it is said hyperbolically because it's not true. The point is that it is a conflict that has been amenable to a negotiated solution, but one of the absolutely contingent things about resolving this conflict is the recognition of Israel. Irrespective whether there's a Palestinian state, that's not the issue. The issue is whatever the Jewish state is, it must be allowed to exist. It must be agreed that it exists. And as long as that doesn't happen, and it's an intractable conflict. BDS has taken the view that negotiations are not the point, and Israel must withdraw from the West Bank, which is its role is predominantly security. The problem with the reality now is, if it withdraws, Hamas becomes a real threat to not only to Israel but to the Palestinian Authority. So there's a just plain existential issue. It's almost, the rest is almost irrelevant currently. It's an existential issue burnished by Iran, which is vehemently, it's not just anti-Israel, it's anti-Jewish. So you have this disconnect between what it says it will do and the support and the parties that it supports. And in a way, it makes Israel a bit of an outlier generally currently, because you have an African continent that, through the AU, recognized Israel as an observer, giving them observer status, and South Africa was one of 2 or 3 countries that objected. You've got the Abraham Accords. So what's happening? Whatever one may think of Israel, what's happening is a pragmatic recognition that things are changing and things need to change. And to my view, where the ANC stands is it supports a group, it supports a position that was to a large extent developed by the Soviets antagonistically towards Israel since it became a state. And obviously, ANC, together with other groups such as the PLO, fell under that sphere of influence. It just looks a bit stuck in the early 1960s. And of course, if the rest of the world is moving on.
We're not
that's the thing about the Middle East and the issue at the Middle East. And Sarah, you mentioned the Abraham Accords, which I think is the fulcrum on which all of these things are currently pivoting. There is a very pragmatic view that countries and states are taking. And as more and more people sign up to those accords, I find, I think, unfortunately, Palestine becomes more and more isolated, and so the pragmatic view on the one side, and what is, I suppose, what BDS and a whole lot of pro-Palestinian movements are looking for and asking for and fighting for, as sitting on opposite ends. And I think more and more the scales are not balanced on their side. The pragmatic scales not balanced on their side.
The pragmatic scales aren't, but on the other hand, you have the enormous force and power of Iran. So, I think we can generally say that the more pragmatic relationships occur, the more likelihood the parties in those relationships can have an impact on changes that need to be made.
But again,
so now you're in a sort of stasis.
But poor old Miss South Africa is caught. I hate to bring it back to the beauty queen, and I know it's for some people it's a sort of puerile and pointless thing, but everything is political these days, and I don't think everything should be. And I see sport increasingly being politicized, not just here, obviously, but in America, you see everything's become political. Every time anyone speaks, they have to be showing their political bona fides before they can carry on with whatever they're doing, whether it's acting in a movie, whether it's going onto a tennis court, whether it's, painting a painting.
Standing on the stage in the swimming costume.
It's exhausting that everything has become political. And now even a beauty queen, listen, we've paid lip service in beauty pageants for years, and I hold no candle for beauty pageants. I think they're stupid and outdated. But for a lot of people, they're important and meaningful, and they give some people, and we've had tremendous success in South Africa with producing ambassadors of an international caliber, and not just beautiful women, but women who've also acquitted themselves really well on the stage in terms of doing and saying the right things and projecting a sort of sense of national prominence and usefulness. I think there's something to be said for that, even for a cynic like me. And here she is. She's just this young girl who's done damn well to have got where she's got to, and she wants to go over and compete with the rest of the world in a really, I suppose, prestigious environment for her. And now the politicians must get in the way. Seems unfair.
Yeah, I think the problem is that because it's being made political when there's very little benefit to doing so, because all that would happen if the opponents to it are successful is she would withdraw, not participate. It would say nothing. It would do nothing. Nothing will have moved. And I agree with you. I hold no candle for beauty pageants either, but they're obviously successful. They're obviously popular. I imagine television and social media plays a role. And they do, for better or for worse, they offer an opportunity. And it's sort of flummery. The political world should be about much greater things. It's inappropriate.
Rory, you might have a point of view on this that could be refreshing to us. Go ahead.
I'm afraid I don't. I really just think it's look. For me, it all boils down to whether we to a social contract. Do we owe each other certain allegiances because we have gone through the same sufferings, and that's what's at issue, I think. And so for one, does South Africa owe Palestine certain allegiances because of the sufferings that we've gone through, that we we feel we can relate to that they're going through, because they helped us or they supported us through apartheid and so on. But also, does South Africa hold a certain allegiance now? To the point that we were making in this earlier debate about, but we voted for, Cyril is supposed to be serving South Africa.
No.
So it kind of means that anyone that's wearing the South African flag anywhere is going to be subjected to the idea of what South Africa is. And right now, South Africa holds a particular policy position, and unfortunately for her, she's now being held captive to that. So I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. That's what we're faced with. So I guess the question now, it now comes back to us on, we said Cyril must represent South Africa, and South Africa, she's going out to represent South Africa, and the South Africa that she's representing holds a particular policy position. And it's sad for her. And yeah, I think at a moral level, it's that question of
an ambiguous one.
Yeah, no,
ambiguous
I
policy
agree.
position. That is actually what is at stake here, is the fact that they say they will withdraw their support for her, although they have diplomatic relations with Israel.
They do.
So is she an ambassador or not? And they have diplomatic relations.
Yeah.
No, but go ahead.
Sorry, Rory. No.
They downgraded the diplomatic relationship. So it certainly does say something about the state of that diplomatic relationship, and unfortunately, she's collateral damage.
I see there are two camps developing here. The one camp sees our government as being a tool that can be helpful to Palestine and should be. Not, and by tool, I don't mean something as a device, but rather as a source for support for Palestine, and that they believe that Israel's being done down. And as you say, we should have sympathy with those of our brethren in the world who are suffering the same way we did. And then there's the other side who, frankly, are starting to see South Africa's government increasingly as being one of the bastions in the world of anti-Semitism. And I mean, those are the 2 points of view that we now have. And neither are necessarily correct, but that's what's developing, is this very bipolar view. If you support the one side, then you see it that way. Support the other side, you see it the other way. Can I play a clip for us quickly, just to end on a high note? This is, I'm not even sure who this gentleman is, but just take a look at this and listen to the things he says about politicians. Because in the aftermath of our elections, I'm thinking more and more along these lines myself.
What is the difference between the ordinary thief and a political thief? Number one, the ordinary thief steals your money, your bag, your watch, and your jewelry, isn't it? But the political thief steals your future, your career, your education, your health, and your business. Number two, the hilarious part is that the ordinary thief will choose whom to rob. But you are the one who choose the political thief to rob you. Because we choose them. We vote them. We blindly say we are not blind. Who is deceiving who? The ridiculous part of the whole issue is that we will fight to defend and protect our belongings from the ordinary thief. Is it not? But we fight each other to defend and protect the political thief. Is that not what we do? Thugs will be fighting themselves to protect those that are stealing our career, stealing our joy, stealing our health, stealing our success. What a shame. What a travesty. It calls for us to think and think deep. The stage we are in as a country is not a stage where you become an onlooker. You have become an onlooker for too long. You must get ready to put your hands to the plow and be part of the process. It's not just about PVC, carry PVC. You must be in the kitchen where it is being determined. You must be there where the decisions are being made. If we are there in our numbers, they cannot outnumber us. But you leave it aloof. Oh, it's too dirty. It's a dirty game. And then the dirty guy is getting to the game of play, and you are there not showing up. And when they begin to make the decisions, you will know whether it's a dirty game or not.
So I'm not going to play the whole thing because it goes on for quite a while, and I hate the way they always take these music and these videos. Music. I don't know why we need why do we need this Hollywood treatment? I mean, the guy's words are powerful enough, but what he's saying is spot on. I mean, we'll all band together to protect ourselves from the predations of some small-time thief, but the big thieves we defend because of, I don't know, ideology, a loyalty or allegiance that we developed in our youth or at some point in our adulthood. And again, here we are stuck now in South Africa with all these loyalties being tested. And I think it's time to just abandon all of the loyalties and just treat these politicians as the thieves that they are. And I think that man makes a lot of sense. He's talking about Nigeria, but he could be talking about us.
Yeah.
About anywhere.
Talking about us.
About anywhere in the world. I think it's I had a brief stint in politics, and I think one of the things I certainly came out of that with was that, you go into these debates with your opponents, and you fight it out on screen, right? And then the debate ends, and you're now walking together out, and you just ask each other because it's campaign season. So you're like, so when are we seeing each other again? I'll see you tomorrow. And then you're chuckling, I got you there, didn't I? And it's really, it's quite something to see how people go out there and they shed blood over these things. But these guys get along. We know Masina and Razmataz and Julius are best of buds. But out there, you would swear that they hate each other. So I think definitely agree with him. It's a scam.
And they call it posturing. They actually have the cheek to have a word for it. They say it's posturing. Well, we know that they all it's almost as if they get together behind closed doors. In fact, we know they get together behind closed doors. And they rub their hands knowing how much they've gotten away with and how they've turned us against each other and in an attempt to just generate their own happiness and wealth. Anyway, I want to thank you all. Sarah, you want last word?
No, I was just going to say, old-fashioned idea is voting and how you vote and why you vote is not necessarily instinctive. I think it actually has to be taught. I use the word we used to use back in my day, the civics at school. But I think there is something to that.
Yeah, no, teaching civics. In fact, this has come up on the Burning Platform a number of times. Anyway, it's really good to see you again, Rorisang, and I wish you well with what are you actually busy with at the moment? Give us a little insight. You look very studious.
I'm deep in the weeds of the business world these days, trying to stay out of trouble. And every now and then I come to the Burning. I come onto the Burning Platform to try and inspire that part of my life, and then I head back into my box.
No, that sounds safer and better than my decisions. Anyway, Sarah, always good to see you, and keep on doing the good work of the Daily Friend. Pumi, we'll see you next week for more.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you. Pums.
Thanks, guys. The Burning Platform returns in a week's time with much more.